Okay, let's get started on downloading WordPress and installing it onto the Mac operating system. So we're going to go through some steps now and also some common problems that occur and how to hopefully solve them. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you've downloaded the correct version of WordPress, wordpress.org, not wordpress.com, and that should have gotten downloaded as a zip file for you. So just go to your downloads directory and double check that. You'll see it there, WordPress, the same version, zip. So we'll just copy that, and what we would need to do now is go to the directory in which you have your root directory installed. Okay, so within your applications directory. So for example, in MAMP, that can be located within the applications, MAMP, and htdocs. That's where you want to place this file. Okay, so if you want to absolutely double check that, you can just go to your MAMP settings itself and check on the preferences to see where the root directory is. Just click on here, web server, and you'll see document root, and it's got it there, applications, MAMP, htdocs. You can see we're using the Apache web server also. So that's fine, that's good to go. So let's check our Finder again. So here we are within that directory. So you can see we're there, MAMP, htdocs, and we want to basically extract that to this directory. So just open it up. That'll extract to that same location. So there it is. There's the WordPress directory. If it is called anything else, if it's called WordPress -551 or anything, just rename that to make sure that there's none of that extra details in there. It's simply just called WordPress. So at this point we can go ahead and actually delete the zip file because it's no longer required. Okay, so there we go. We have that basic set of files we need in the location with which we're working on, which is applications, MAMP, htdocs, and now WordPress. Okay, so the next step that we want to do is go and set up an actual database that we'll need to store everything. Okay, so everything is placed into the root directory. We're going to make a database now through PhpMyAdmin. So go back to MAMP. You can start the servers. Just be sure that the servers are running at all times. Apache server, MySQL. So that opened that PHP directly for us. But if you choose open web page, open web start page, you'll go to the same location. Okay, so you might want to just type it in directly, but it's handy on this particular installation. It lets you know some very important details, which we'll come to later. For example, the local host name and number and the passwords involved. We'll come to that a little bit later, but that's why MAMP opens this page for you. But otherwise, you can just go directly to localhost and PhpMyAdmin. Okay, and you can even see it there. For example, the local host itself is just localhost 8888. If we were to look at that local host directly, what we'd see is just the standard index files which are stored in your root directory. So there's nothing really there at the moment beyond the WordPress files. But let's just leave that for now. We don't want to look at it until we've made a database. So what we want to do is build a database which is going to store all of the information in our WordPress website when we make it. So the first thing we want to do is just go make sure we're in the local host. It's 8889 there, don't worry about that. And we'll make a database here. So I'll call this database, just like in the lab, WP underscore CDM data CDM underscore 6. Okay, so it's not the best name in the world, but it should still work for us, and we'll worry about the security features of all of that later. So double check the name is spelled correctly before you create a database, because it's important that it is actually spelled right. So WP data CDM underscore 6. So create that database there. And the next thing we want to do is actually add a user who's going to administrate this database for us. So you could just stick with the root user when it comes to building the WordPress file, but it's probably a better idea to actually make one. So go to privileges there, and we can see, for example, here's another user I added earlier. Here's the root user. We don't necessarily want to use the root user for our building a database, so we'll go ahead and make one. So add user, and in this case here, I'm going to just add a few details here. So I've actually kind of saved these details down in a little page here in TextEdit, and I recommend you do the same thing for some other information that you're going to need to refer to later. You can write it down if you wish, but I like to just write it into an actual TextEdit file for easier access, and we can just simply cut and paste that material in. So the user I'm going to make is called Mr. Brightside32. So we go in, just put that in there. I'll paste it in. So Mr. Brightside32. And this is important because some of you got this error before. There's a particular error that a few of you got that I was seeing in class that's best avoided. You may have come across this error in establishing database connection. You get all these questions. Are you sure you have the correct username and password? Are you sure you've typed the correct host name? Especially those who are using a Mac user would have got this error. So one of the things you can do is you can just say root, and the root is the username. The username is root, and password is root when it comes to that question in WordPress. And that'll get over it, but it's not the best practice in the world to do that. The simplest way is just simply choose the correct host name. So that's probably been missing. I think in Windows you can just get by without putting the direct host name in, which is probably what those of you using a Mac did when you tried the same thing from the lecture on a Mac. So the way we solve that is just be sure that you actually do choose the host name. So instead of just saying any host, make sure that you've actually chosen a local host. You don't have to write 8888 because this is just saying choose the local host of this particular installation. Okay, so that'll solve that problem for you if you had that issue. So just try that, or pause this video and go directly to that instance if that's been an issue for you. Okay, so there's the error again. You might have recognized it if you've installed it like that already. And I'm not going to try and recreate that error, but if I don't put localhost in here, that's going to happen. Okay, so put in the password there, and put in paste, so you can see what I'm doing. And what I'm going to do now is just scroll down to the very bottom and check all the privileges. So this is a sort of a super user, pretty much the same privilege as the root user, but it is a different name, this Mr. Brightside name. So click on that, go, and that's been successfully added. So we click on the list of users, and we can see now there's Mr. Brightside32, who we are interested in. He's going to basically be our user when we come to install WordPress. So let's do this again. So we basically will go to the local host. In this particular computer, it's localhost 8888. If you're using a Mac, it's probably exactly the same for you. You can see that we just have this set of directories there. And I don't necessarily want to work with that at all. We'll just go directly to the WordPress directory, and this will begin the installation for us. So all going well, you should have this screen up here. There's another issue that might have happened for you, for example, when you were actually downloading and when you were unzipping it or extracting the files. That's another thing that can go wrong that some people emailed me about. And it was, you might have been using WinZip or whatever version of the extractor you were using. It just didn't extract everything the way it should. But what you should have is inside your WordPress directory, just double check that you've got these three directories there. So those three main directories you should have there: WPAdmin, WP Content, WP Includes. Often this WP Admin was missing, and people were getting that sort of error. You know, there doesn't seem to be a WP config file in there. So just be sure that this is actually extracted correctly when you're first extracting that zip file. Okay, so like I said, I don't really want to create the errors here. I'll just explain how to do it right. So I can see by looking at that I've done it right. Everything is extracted correctly. I've got the three directories there. And when it comes to making the database, we've said that it is the local host. Be very kind of explicit about that when making your new users. Ensure that you do say that it's a local host rather than just kind of leaving it as any host, like I said there a minute or two ago. So you can just double check back on that by rewinding this video. So now this should install correctly. We'll continue, and we need all that information. That's why I've been writing it down. You can either write this on a piece of paper beside you. I find it just as useful, or if you want to copy and paste it just for the likes of this video, I'm just putting it into a text edit file. So it's asking us for database name, username. That's going to be Mr. Brightside32, and its password, and the database host, which is the local host. Okay, so a table prefix. This is what all of our WordPress files are basically going to be underscored with. So we can say let's go, and now we need that information. So I'll just do a cut and paste here of everything. So the database itself is called this WP underscore CDM6. So our username, we want the username to be who we just had here. So it's Mr. Brightside 32. Okay, Mr. Brightside 32. Password, you probably won't remember the password. It's in the lab, but you could use any password you want for that just as easily. So there is the password, and paste that in. Okay, now database host, local host, you can just leave that as it is, WP underscore. Okay, so all right, Sparky, you've made it to this part. Now we want to communicate with the database. Well, it can communicate with the database, and that's probably the hardest part. If you can get that connection to the database, it knows it's going to basically create a configuration file with all that details in it. Now that configuration file didn't necessarily exist beforehand, but we can talk about that in the labs the next week. I'll open it in a minute now when it does get installed. So run the installation, and that's basically asking us now for a whole lot of details of what our site should look like. So we've been successful so far. What we're basically going to do now is just put the actual details of what the user will kind of see on this first page. So I'll just call this my first WordPress site. You know, whatever we want to call it. Let's put it in capitals so we see it. I'll just call this a creative digital media blog. Something we can see updated weekly. So that's going to come up in big kind of capital letters on our first page. So my first WordPress site. Well, maybe let's make it a little bit more generic. Sorry, a little bit more specific than generic. So CDM year 3, just so you'll see it. Okay. Okay. So okay, so then that works for us, and it brings us up to this next section where we'll basically see this is the information that's going to be asked for, where we enter what's going to be seen on the main site. So my first WordPress site, let's call it something a little bit interesting, more interesting than that, something we'll recognize. You know, just CDM 3 year 3 blog. Okay, so this is the username that someone's going to log in to administrate the site. So I'll just put my own name down there, and you know, I'm not going to put much of a strong password here because I want to remember it. So Arnie H, I'll just leave it as that, same name as the username. But obviously, when it comes to make your actual site that you're going to use for a client or for yourself even, put a decent password in there. Okay, so it's asking me to confirm the use of the week password, and I can just put my email down here as well. Generally speaking, when you get a hosting company to save your site, you'll get your domain name there. So whatever your site is. So for example, I might even go for something like .ie, arnie@arnie.ie, or info@arnie.ie, whatever it is your hosting company gives you. But you can do that later on. At the moment, we're just installing on the local host. Okay, so check those details. CDM3 year 3 blog. Okay. Username, and install WordPress. So now it's going to install everything and create those files, which we can get a look at later. So WordPress has been installed. You can log into that. We'll type in those details. So here's the username, which I just put in there. Okay, make sure you can see everything there. And log in, which will basically bring us up to the administration dashboard. So here we are on the administration dashboard. And what I'm going to just do before I start looking into that is just go back to one little file. I'd like to show you that file, wp-config, that did get created, just so you have a little bit of a better idea of where everything is going here. So we're still in the applications directory, and we'll look at MAMP, and this is the same for Windows. I mean, this file will get created just as easily for Windows. That file there, WP config, it didn't exist before, it just got created. I'm going to open it up in Dreamweaver, and we'll take a look at a few things which may look familiar to us. So there's all the details that I had entered, and when we go down here, we'll see the same thing. So there's the details. There's our, WP data CDM, Mr. Brightside 32 as the database name, database user, database password is what we put in, database host is local host, pretty much exactly what I was putting in here. So we don't necessarily need to say localhost 888. That's particular to your computer. When you're entering in the details into the WordPress installation, it just means the local host, whatever that may be, whether it's 8888 or whether it's localhost 8889. It just means the local host. Okay, so that's that one file. We'll come back to that later in later classes. But for now, let's just get the actual installation running. So you don't need to know too much about WP config file at the moment, beyond that it exists and it just got created for you. Okay, so let's go back to the installation. Right, so we go back now to our dashboard. So your website is installed. It's WordPress website is installed here. We just want to do a few little kind of polishing up features to make it work a little bit more clearly and a little bit more, professionally, I guess, as expected from any website. So one of the first things we need to do is change that your kind of general settings, your URL should not be _WordPress. Like, you're not going to type in your website like thetimes.com/WordPress. You want to just go directly to the URL that you have your domain name. So for example, in this situation, if I didn't do that, my website would be like arnie.ie/WordPress, which we certainly wouldn't want when you don't have to. Keep it short as possible. So we'll just keep that down to localhost as whatever it is on your computer where you're developing it. Okay. Later videos we'll worry about migrating to the actual internet later. So you can double check everything there. So tagline, this is just another WordPress site. Well, I hope you're not planning to make just another WordPress site and make something kind of interesting. So we'll call this CDM3 year blog, whatever, 2020. Okay, weirdest year of the decade. Okay, there we go. So all that's going to appear, so that's why I'm writing it in capital letters, so that we'll see that on our final web page when we finally run it. So save changes there. So settings are saved, and we're nearly there. We want to just make one final little change with the index file. So we're going to go now then to the index file and back to that directory. You want to get very familiar with this particular structure here in the applications, whether you're using Windows or not. So applications, and our MAMP directory, htdocs, which is the root, and there's no index file there. So we want to kind of copy the index file in there. Currently it's here. We don't really just want it inside that directory. That's why we went to all that bother before in the settings, and we'll just pop it in there. Okay, so now that we have the index file copied into the location we want it to be in, we need to make a couple of very subtle changes to it. So you got to open that in some browser or some window, some IDE rather, to see the code. So I'm just going to use Dreamweaver. You can use Eclipse or anything else you really want. And the particular line we want to isolate is this line here, which is require directory, WP blog header, etc. And we're going to really much just get rid of that and replace it with a different line. And this line is given to you in the worksheet. And what it's really doing is it's just telling the index file what we just did, that we've placed the index file in a separate directory to where all the WordPress stuff is. So all the WordPress material is in the the /WordPress directory, rather than being in the same directory where the index file itself is. So that means that when you put in your URL, the index file will know to point to the remainder, the other directory where all the WordPress material is. So we'll save that down now. So save it, and that's pretty much all we got to do to that file. We can go back to our browser then. the administration file, the administration details. So it's WordPress /WP-admin. Okay, and that's pretty much the dashboard where you build your files. What we want to do now is see what the end result looks like. So just to kind of recap on what we did there, we changed the settings to have this large kind of capital letter information of what the blog is going to be about, and we changed the URL, the site address, to just be the local host rather than have to be this kind of /WordPress setting to it. So I'll just click on that and our blog comes up. So here it is. So CDM year 3 blog, 2020, the weirdest year of the decade, etc. So there you go. That's everything done. How you first set up your WordPress site. You can see then the information's there, for example, the authors and who can post blogs, etc. on it. There's one final thing that I think you should probably do that is not necessarily going to change the way things work, but I think it's a good idea for a security perspective to actually move that configuration file that we made changes to at the very beginning of this video. So if you recall, at the very beginning of this video, we made some changes to this WP config file, which has all the information about the database within it. But I think it's, for safety reasons, don't keep that in the WordPress directory, because, well, that's exactly where a hacker's going to look to find out all that information about passwords and about the database name. So you've got your password in there, your database name in there. So that leaves things wide open to, to a hacker to get that information. So just take it out of there and paste it here, just beside the index file. So you've got your WordPress information there. We'll get rid of the config file now. So we've just moved it, so we'll delete the one that was in the WordPress directory. So only one copy of it exists here, where in the kind of root directory. Okay, so in the htdocs directory, it should look like this. It should look like WordPress folder with everything about WordPress in it, the index, of course, and the configuration file. Okay, so that'll keep it safe as well as functional. So let's take a look at that final look of the website. It's not going to really appear any differently, and you're good to go. So what we'll do in the next few classes is we'll work with the actual dashboard and make some changes to the website to create something interesting and something usable as a blog. Okay, thanks for watching.